All right, so appreciate everyone joining this morning. Today we have a great speaker lined up. I'm going to pass it to Nick to do introductions, and then we'll spend some time doing the presentation, and we'll try to leave some room at the end for some questions. So if you have questions throughout, feel free to put them in the chat. I'll be moderating that and watching for it, and we can address those toward the end with any remaining time. With that said, I will pass it to you, Nick.
Thank you, Michelle. So I think 2.5 years ago, we had Mark here again, giving a presentation about his first book, Retail Therapy, where he was discussing, what is happening in the retail. We all know that retail gets disrupted every 70, 80 years. And it was a very forward-thinking book, predicting some of the things that were coming. And addressing all the issues. I know some people were skeptical whether these things were going to come, and here we are. COVID came, accelerated, and made a lot of predictions that Mark made in his book true. So during the lockdown, he was very busy writing another book, Retail Recovery, where he described as how the retail world should move forward after the pandemic. Mark has a brand consulting firm in the UK, and now he's expanding to Dubai. So he does spend half his time in the UK, half his time in Dubai. And as we were discussing before, he's spending some holidays in Greece as well. So Mark, thank you again for being here. We're very, very excited to hear what you have to say about retail recovery.
Oh, thanks, Nick, and welcome everybody, and thank you for having me on the podcast. So the subject is retail recovery: how creative retailers are winning in their post-apocalyptic world. I think we all know that there has been a long-term structural crisis in retail over the past few years. And we also probably all know that it's been quite badly exacerbated by COVID. We've had the physical closure of stores, which of course never happened even during wars and revolutions. And we've had the e-commerce market share going as high as 20% in the US and 33% in the UK. And we're probably all familiar with the devastation that has wrought among the incumbent retailers. We've had some more high-profile bankruptcies on top of the ones that we had in the preceding period. So we've had big players like JCPenney, Neiman Marcus, J. Crew, Lord & Taylor, to name but a few, going bust. And we've had a wide number of closures, around 12,000 major brand name stores closed in 2020, which is the highest ever. We've also seen a knock-on effect on the retail property market. As COVID happened, of course, a lot of retailers were unable to pay their rents, and that then passed the financial burden on to the retail REITs, and we've seen some big declines in share prices and also some fairly major bankruptcies: CBL, Pennsylvania, Preet, Washington Prime, and Into. Into is the UK #1 mall owner. So, we're probably all familiar with all of this, and it may seem, given all the problems that we're experiencing, strange to talk of a retail recovery at this time. So I'll go on to explain why the new book is called that. I think the main reason is that things finally got so bad that it created a kind of reset moment, a bit like a sort of intervention with a person, with the person's psychology, where it's a sort of pattern break. I think that although the incumbent retailers were obviously aware of the threat from online and other causes, and were taking some actions towards dealing with them, I think it's fair to say that their mentality remained oriented towards their stores. I mean, that's where they'd grown up. and it still seemed to them to be the main business. And I think that the act of physically seeing their stores shut down by the government and not being able to use them at all and having to rely on online and other channels created, as I say, a kind of reset moment, and kind of broke that retail physical first mindset. And I think that what we're now seeing is a very major reallocation of business models. And it's not just affecting retailers, it's actually affecting a lot of other players in the market. So we've seen, of course, the retailers rapidly expanding their investment in online at the height of the COVID crisis. We've had people like Zara announcing billions of investment to increase their online share up to about 25 to 30%. In the UK, we've had Marks and Spencer's bought the #1 food delivery service, which is also the #1 online grocery, which is called Ocado, and integrate their data with Ocado. And in general, most of the major retailers have seen an enormous expansion, enormous investment in online, and they are all working towards making it closer to maybe 1/3, 2/3, or even aspiring towards getting it towards 50-50. And that's something we didn't see before. At the same time, we're also seeing wholesale brands, traditional wholesale brands, starting to look finally at going direct to the consumer, mainly via websites, but also via flagship stores. So probably most interesting of those is Nike with its consumer direct offense, which has targeted and indeed met that target to go to 30% online, and also to massively expand its flagship store program and to cut back its wholesale clients down to, I think, the top 15 or 20 third-party sports retailers in the world. But also we're starting to see even the fast-moving consumer goods companies
Oh, did we lose Mark? Just 1 second. We're reaching out to him to see if his connection dropped. Just give us a moment, please. Hey, Mark, I think you're back.
The Wi-Fi in my place seemed to go down temporarily. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, very sorry about that.
Okay.
So yeah, so we're starting to see the online pure plays opening stores, and we're also seeing retailers and pure plays tapping wholesale. For example, in the UK, Mothercare, which is a children's product company, has recently started. They actually closed all their stores in the UK. They still trade through retail through their franchisees internationally, and they have their Mothercare website, and they've started selling Mothercare wholesale through Boots. And we've also seen some pure plays starting to sell through wholesale. So what we're seeing is a blurring of the old demarcation lines. In the old days, we had wholesale brands, we had online players, we had retailers. Now it seems to me that quite rapidly, the new default model is what I call new generation multi-channel brands. So no matter whether you're a retailer by roots or a wholesale brand by roots or a pure play by roots, it seems to me that almost everybody is going to redefine themselves just as a brand that is kind of free floating and that can trade through these different channels. So given that I think that is the trend that we're seeing, what I tried to do was to outline the ground rules for success as a new generation multi-channel brand. What is it that's going to make people successful? So the first thing that kind of really identified was to understand the degree of this competitive shift that has happened over the last 20 years. Because I think there's a lot of emphasis on the bits of the process, like people will talk about e-commerce. But I think that it's something more fundamental than that, that has been brought about through the technological revolution. And what I call that is the shift from the classical brand retail model to the new generation multi-channel model. So we all grew up with a model that said you had factories supplying brands, brands supplying retailers, and retailers supplying the consumer. And all of those businesses were high fixed cost investment businesses. Whether it was retail cost of the stores or whether it was brands, the cost of building those brands, it was characterized by very high barriers to entry. And what that meant in effect was that there was a limited number of players per vertical and limited consumer choice. And, you know, I draw attention in the book to my own situation in the 1990s. I was in an industry where there were 7 or 8 big brands, and there was probably about 15 or 20 big customers, and we all knew each other. You know, in that environment, you had limited consumer choice. And also the other thing was that if consumers wanted to find out about products, really their major source of information was the producers themselves, the brands or the retailers. So the producers controlled communications, and there was limited consumer knowledge. Now, those of you who studied economics at college or whatever will know that a limited number of players and limited consumer knowledge are classic preconditions for either monopoly or for oligopoly, the sort of rule of the few players. And that indeed is what I believe the brand retail industry used to be effectively. Now, under the new model, you've had this revolutionary change, which we're all aware of course, which is where you go from factory to online brand to consumer, the direct consumer model. While that model has its challenges, the one thing that you can say about it is that it does have relatively much lower barriers to entry. These days, any kid can open up a Shopify website if they've got a great new product, a great new idea, a great new service, and they're good on, you know, savvy with social media, TikTok or whatever, they can get a business going. So the actual entry barriers have fallen. And we've seen a huge flowering of startups over the last 5 to 10 years. And also we've seen a huge internationalization of businesses. So now, you know, if I search my product category, you know, I now get something like, you know, 5 million resources offering to fulfill my needs. So many of those, of course, are international players that have come into my market. So others are startups, but there's now a huge number of players and almost unlimited consumer choice. And the other thing that is perhaps not always perhaps emphasized is that we've had the rise of peer-to-peer communication with the technology revolution. And this has created a pretty clear, perfect, pretty near perfect consumer knowledge. So now if you want to research a new product, a new brand that you might be interested in, you can find loads and loads of opinions online about that brand that will give you, you know, from your peers, that will give you a pretty objective view of that brand. And that's broken the producer control over product communications. So you've now got pretty near perfect consumer knowledge. And as, again, you'll all be aware, perfect consumer knowledge and unlimited consumer choice are classic preconditions for perfect competition. So I believe we've seen a shift from oligopoly to perfect competition. And that's a very, very profound shift. And, you know, what does it actually mean in practice? Well, what it means is that brands are now willing to offer and able to offer, and consumers are expecting a much, much bigger package from brands than used to be the case. You know, in the old days, if you owned the shop on the corner near where people lived, you know, you pretty much needed just to put the stock in the store. If you were a brand that supplied that product, you know, you supplied it into the retailer, and then you pressed the big mass advertising button, and consumers obediently showed up in the store and took away the products. You didn't really have to do that much more than that, because you had already bought your entry into the marketplace through the investment that had been made in the past to create your dominance in that particular category or in that particular locality. You basically, so most stores were in reality what I call glorified warehouses. They were basically ever increasing size spaces full of stock, little bit of customer service, little bit of branding, but mainly the main purpose was just to transact, and the consumer showed up and transacted. So, you know, that used to be enough, but it isn't enough anymore, because new players have come into the market. The market is hundreds of times more competitive. And what people are prepared to do for consumers and able to do consumers has dramatically increased. So the first thing to say is that it is no longer sufficient just to be able to transact. You may have been there for 100 years as a brand or a retailer. It doesn't really make any difference, because at the end of the day, your product is as good as anybody else's product. And this ability to transact stock is become really a commodity. And as we all know, in commodity markets, prices and margins tend to fall, and that's what's happened. And that explains why so many people have gone bankrupt. The new brands that have flooded onto the market have raised the stakes. Why have they done that? Well, you know, whenever you get a massive assault, a massive disruption of incumbents by disruptors, you know, to break into a market, you have to have something more, to offer something more. And that's what these kids, these Gen Z millennial kids did. They went into the market and they offered a whole bunch more to consumers that the incumbents didn't. You know, amongst those things, which we see all around us, are, you know, many of them were mission-based, which, you know, is far more than just, you know, the traditional, you know, we support charities or whatever. Many of them were very zealous supporters of big picture causes, which their brand communities cared about. You know, so Warby Parker, you know, trying to solve the problem of vision around the world. You know, many of the other startups had similar types of missions, and they were community builders, because the interactive nature of the internet meant that they could have a much more interactive relationship with their user group, and they actively sought to build a community around these values and to involve their customers in decisions that previously would have been considered to be the preserve of the brand team. So they would involve consumers in product development, they would involve them in testing, they would interact with them and have events and get their ideas directly. They would also, and this is major, is they would use user-generated content for their marketing. So their consumers, their loyal or avid promoter consumers, would wear the product or whatever, or use the product on their own social media feeds. And therefore the marketing stopped being centrally controlled and started being much more distributed out to the community. They shifted away from mass marketing towards personalized data-based marketing, which is an enormous shift, which I think we're all aware of. But they got very, very good very quickly at using that data to really understand consumers at an individual level, and to marketing to them on a personal level and having a personal relationship with them, which the incumbents were just so much slower to do. The interactive approach we've talked about, many of them offer dramatically better value for money. So Warby Parker would offer, you know, designer sunglasses for $99, whereas, you know, the incumbents were offering them at $350. And of course, the greater convenience of delivery to the door. So there were a whole bunch of benefits that they provided to consumers that the incumbents weren't doing or were slow to do. And so, you know, dropping those barriers to entry, having that massive influx of new innovative brands has changed the game. And really any player now, including incumbents, to remain in the game has got to start to adopt the same philosophy. And I mean, the good news is, and I've got some case studies in the book, there are now quite a lot of incumbents who are who have adapted and are starting to offer the same things. And the great news is that, you know, it's working. People like Target, people like Best Buy, people like Walmart, in fact, and a host of other people are starting to do it, and it's really working. Now, the key thing also as a multi-channel new generation brand is the correct use of channels is critical. People talk about omni-channel as if all channels were equal. My firm belief is that not all channels are equal. I think that the different channels are good for different things, depending on what you want to do. The online channel is, in my view, a much efficient channel. Just the fact that you've got centralized inventory as opposed to duplicated inventory across multiple stores with multiple out of stocks. 25% of all American transactions lost because of out of stocks is a huge advantage. The greater choice that you can put online, particularly through the marketplace model, where the retailer doesn't even, the online retailer doesn't even own the stock. What we call the endless aisle of the net, it beats what you can put in the four walls of a store, hands down. Obviously, the greater convenience of the product coming direct to your door, the much easier data capture and the ability to use that data for personalized marketing, and the massively lower cost for repeat transactions. And I make the distinction between repeat transactions and customer acquisition, which of course is a distinction that direct-to-consumer companies, that is very important to direct-to-consumer companies, because repeat transactions are very, very low cost online, because you've already acquired the customer data, the customer already uses your service and has probably loyalty to the product. And it's as easy, I could sit here, if you can see me, I could just order something online while talking to you on Amazon and it would be delivered to me and you wouldn't even probably notice I'd ordered it. So if just buying repeat things is very, very low cost transaction. Of course, acquiring customers is not low cost, which we'll come on to, but you know, just the repeat, the great ease of repeat transactions online. Now, the store channel is, however, and I think that what's interesting now is that the direct-to-consumer companies are starting to realize this and starting to say we were wrong because we said we would never have stores and now we're going to have stores. That what they've realized is that you can get much higher levels of consumer engagement in the physical channel. Just because you're meeting with them physically and you know it's a 3D environment, you can involve them much more. It can be a lower cost channel. You know, you can use brand theater. I mean, the new Nike flagship stores are fantastic brand theater environments. You know, they're less about just selling things and more about creating a fantastic kind of almost virtual reality type of experience. You can use them for education. Of course, people at Apple have been doing that for years, but others are starting to do it. You can use it for community building. There's a small British brand owned by the Walmart family that called Rafa. It's a cycling brand. They have big coffee houses in their stores. In fact, about 50% of the space is coffee house, but all the Rafa community meet in stores to have coffee. And, you know, there's a great atmosphere, and that's where all the exciting brand development occurs because you've got interaction going on. You can offer expert service in stores. I mean, CVS is doing marvelous work with its health hubs. It started to transform itself into a low-level medical service provider doing, you know, diabetes testing and weight loss programs and immunizations. And they've got care concierges looking after families in store. So they've shifted away from, you know, they've shifted space from selling, you know, potato chips and nuts and things and chewing gum, and they've shifted space into having service centers. So, you know, you can provide expert service in stores. You know, if you move the store model away from pure stock transactions and free up automate a lot of processes and free up your team, then the role of the store staff changes. They're less administrative stock movers and till operators, and they can become almost like personal stylists or personal shoppers, much higher level of intelligence and engagement and charm that can really make visiting a retail space really exciting. And if you do all those things right, even the online people are realizing that potentially as a customer recruitment and brand engagement channel, it's a lower cost channel than online, particularly given the Google, Facebook duopoly over the online marketing channel, which has made online customer acquisition so expensive. So people like Warby Parker now are really investing in stores But they're not using stores in the traditional way. They're using it in this new way as brand engagement, customer engagement centers. And a lot of the online people are really relying on the online to be the backbone, the transactional backbone that will handle all the repeat business. So, like I say, having that correct channel balance and moving more from an incumbent point of view, retailers moving more of their stock online, centralizing it, having less of it in the store, and using the stores for a different purpose, repurposing the space, I think is absolutely critical. Then rule 4 is to do with re-engineering the cost base. You know, we've talked about how the supply chain is collapsing, how brands are going direct to consumer, cutting out retailers, cutting out traditional wholesale brands with their sales forces and all those costs. You've got brands going direct. You've also got retailers investing very heavily now in private label. People like Target, Bed Bath & Beyond, Dick's Sporting Goods are really pushing private label, because what I think people have understood, what Nike understands and what these retailers understand, both in their different ways from their different perspectives, is that you can't have two players in the mix. It's too much cost, it's too much markups, and you know, that supply chain's collapsing down to having a single player between the factory and the consumer. And then another thing about the cost base is that, along with this changing role of stores and using them as customer engagement service centers as opposed to massive stock, big box stock transactional centers, is that we're starting to see retailers creating lean stores. And of course, the online players, when they're opening stores, are not opening big box, large stores. Generally, they're opening small stores. They're compact brand introduction centers rather than glorified warehouses. So we've got people like Nordstrom's with Nordstrom Local. We've got IKEA with their design centers, and various others. Opening smaller stores and using large screens in the stores to sell stock that is not physically present. Like an IKEA design center only has a fraction of the stock that's available in their big stores. AliExpress recently opened a store in Paris. It was 400 square meters. Now AliExpress has 50 million products on its website, but obviously not 50 million products in its 400-meter store. So, you know, the changing role of the store as a brand introduction point, rather than saying we've got to cram all of our product range in the store. And that is all to do with re-engineering the cost base, because at the end of the day, underlying this whole revolution was a drop in the costs and a drop in prices, and it became more competitive. So having huge big box stores is in my view, not going to be, I don't see retailers opening huge big box stores. They may open large flagship stores. That's a different purpose. That is the kind of shock and awe brand experience in very, very high traffic city center locations, international city center locations. But I think the large, you know, out of town mall stores, you know, 400,000 square foot, 600,000 square foot, I don't think we're going to see that in the future. Underlying all of this is technology. Now, we all know about this, but it's interesting just to look at the different ways that technology is being used. Automation of basic functions. So, you know, you want to have self-checkout. You want to have cashless, so you don't have to, you know, have the cash cycle in the store. Moving inventory out of store, having less inventory physically present in the store, so you don't have to have as much that basic function. Automation of those functions to take cost out and also to free up staff. Data collection and integration, you know, using stores as data collection points. I think one of the big missed opportunities of the incumbents is they didn't use their stores to collect data to transfer into their online businesses. I mean, Toys R Us went bust with like 19 million people in its customer loyalty program, but a far lower number in its internet database. They never leveraged that customer loyalty data. They never, because it was two different data systems, and they wouldn't bring them together. So, you know, they collecting data from stores, integrating store and online data is critical, and using apps with lots of benefits and customer loyalty programs like the Nike app. You know, the first thing, a loyal Nike person, there are even Nike stores where you can't go in unless you're in the loyalty program and you use the app to open the door of the store, because they know they want to collect the data on everything you're doing in that store, because it's so critical. And then also using data for customer engagement. So you've got using large screens in stores to take the place really of the old physical fit outs and branding that used to be put in stores. My view of the store of the future is just going to have walls lined with screens and windows lined with screens, and you're going to transmit the branding and marketing messages through the screen. And therefore, to create that magic brand theatre, maybe telling the brand story or its history through screens, you can use technology for that. Interactive screens to service customers and help them check out, all those kind of things. And also transactional support, using screens to sell the inventory that is no longer present in the store, to have beautiful three-dimensional shots of the product, so you can sell it and then ship it from your online warehouse. So technology is key. Now, all of that's really about the retail brand model. Just a word about the retail property model. This also, in my view, has to change. Because we're all aware of the classical retail property model, the anchor big box retail tenants locked into long 10, 15-year leases with long 6-month fit out periods before they start trading to do all the physical fit out, upwards only rent reviews. And then armed with all of that, the mall owner would go to the banks and borrow money long term, to build out the mall. A nice business model while it lasted. But now, under tremendous pressure, as we've seen, the classical retail anchor tenants are just disappearing. People willing to open or maintain large big box stores, that number is shrinking dramatically. We've got tons of malls closing down. The only source of future business, in my view, for the mall owners and the main street property owners, they're going to have to engage with the new generation brands to survive. In other words, they're going to have to engage either with brands coming in from abroad internationally, or with the startups, with the online direct consumer pure plays. Now, the good news is, as we've seen, that the pure play army, of which there are tens of thousands of brands, are interested in opening stores, because, as we've seen, it can be a better place to recruit customers, a cheaper place to recruit customers than online. So there is willingness on both sides, but the one thing is that these new gen brands don't have is experience with running large retail networks. They are not physical stores retailers, and therefore my view is that if the malls want to survive in the future, they have to de-skill this process. They have to make opening a store as easy as building a Shopify website. And what's that going to mean? Well, they're not going to want to lock in to these 10, 15-year leases. My view is that the new generation online brands are going to see stores as more like a marketing campaign, a marketing drive. Sure, we'll go into this high traffic mall, we'll go in for 9 months to a year, we'll harvest all the data we can, and then maybe we want to go to a different one. Because when you think about it, the whole idea of having a store in the same place all the time under the old model was that the consumer knew where the store was to come back and repeat purchase. But when your permanent place is always in the same place online, and that is your major transactional hub, you don't need your physical stores to always be in the same place. Now, I know this sounds like pop-up stores, but in my mind, it's going to be much better than pop-up stores, because I think pop-up stores shortchange the consumer in terms of engagement. They tend to be like white spaces that people shove products into. I see something much more dramatic happening, which is what I call plug and play spaces. So I think that the mall owners will have, in order to recruit and harvest all these new brands, they're going to have to make it easier for them to come in and go out flexibly. And therefore, I think they're going to have to pre-equip spaces, probably more compact spaces, and create shorter setup times. Now, if they equip these places with technology, it makes more sense for them to own the technology and to own the staff, and to be able to flip the branding quickly by putting a different marketing chip in, having the product trainer show up and train the staff, having high-level staff that moves from brand to brand that are essentially customer engagement, theatrical, probably out of work actors and actresses, and have the space be pre-equipped also with technology for measuring customer interactions, so that the brands can come in for whatever period, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year. If it goes well, maybe they'll stay longer. They can test a new marketplace, see if they want to open a more permanent store. They may want to, say, go into the New York area and test whether there's demand for their product. They may want to come in from abroad And you've got people like Showfields in New York and Neighborhood Goods in Texas that are pioneering this plug and play model. And they've got online setup that relates directly with Shopify websites. So you can even load your stock into the retail space online. And they've got brands that have come in that have never put a toe into the United States physically, that have opened stores and have tested the demand for their product. So I think that they're pioneers showing the way towards a new retail property model that is going to de-skill opening a store and make it much, much easier. So the above rules represent a kind of quick overview of a roadmap towards potential retail recovery. So this is where we get on to why am I optimistic? Why do I call it retail recovery? As I say, I think that the impact of COVID on top of the longer running crisis has created this reset moment. We've got this change in mindset towards new generation multi-channel. And I think that these new generation brands, whether they be ex-incumbent retailers, ex-incumbent wholesale brands, or startup D2Cs, or Chinese or Indians coming into the market for the first time, will be going to be far more, using this model, are going to be far more interesting than their classical predecessors. I think they're going to employ the whole playbook of the D2Cs, mission-based. They're going to be interactive with their customers. They're going to be really focusing on building a brand community and interacting and having events with that brand community and listening to their brand community. They'll be personalizing marketing, and to cap it all, they'll be offering better value for money. And I think that they will change the way, as I've said, they use their stores. They're going to use their online channel as their transactional backbone to hold their stock and to transact. And they may use order online, pick up in store, or they may use pure delivery to the home. Or they may definitely use order in store and ship from online. So that will carry more of the inventory, the transactional burden, that will do the efficient servicing, particularly for repeat purchasing. But the stores are going to become places where people want to engage their brands with their consumers. They're going to become theatrical places. They're going to be staffed by much more expert customer service people, much more enthusiastic. The retail job will change. It'll become a higher level, higher paid job, because when you think about it, if it's the first brand interaction, you're potentially leveraging a lifetime value online far greater than the value of that transaction. So you can pay your brand specialist in store to more money to deliver that really, really well. And I think that if the retail property people come on board and move more to a plug and play, shorter, easier lease model, de-skill retailing, they can potentially turn malls and main streets into a kaleidoscope of ever-changing new brands and experiences. And so in summary, the dropping of barriers to entry and the consequent shift in power to consumers has been very painful for the industry, but it is actually a gain for society. It has created the basis for a new and better retail model. And I'll leave you with a final thought that is not mine, but I got from somewhere else, which is consumers used to need to go to stores to get their goods. They no longer need to visit stores, but they can be encouraged to want to go. And that is what I believe this retail revolution is going to do. And that is why I believe we have a bright future for retail as a whole, and feel it is correct to use the term retail recovery. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks so much.
Get some questions, maybe.
We didn't put a picture of the book.
I can show you the book.
I think, Michelle, I don't know if you want to take the questions. There were some on, one on the chat.
Yeah, I saw Ben, and I don't know if you want to add more color commentary to this, but when you're describing the plug and play kind of nature of future retail stores, Mark, Ben Humphreys in the chat mentioned that it's sort of like an Airbnb for the mall. So Ben, I don't know if you want to
that's a great analogy. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, nothing really to add. Just trying to think through how you make it as frictionless as possible for someone who doesn't run a store, hasn't run a store before, to come into a mall, and it's already kitted for them to just start almost the next day, right?
Yeah, I mean, basically, look, if you're an online player, you're not used to running staff rotas or having, check in, check out on your store system. You're not used to cash management. You're not used to store operating procedures or motivating lots of teams that are distant. You don't have all that skill set. What you are used to is having really, really great data on all your customer interactions online. You can see exactly what pages they looked at, how long they spent, whether they engage, which products they engage with, whether they abandoned cart. So, what they're going to want is they're going to want someone else to take care of the stuff they don't know about, but to install technology that gives them something very close, that turns a store into something very similar to a website, which you can now get with cameras and in-store customer tracking devices. You can tell the level of engagement, how many people are passing the store, how many people are coming in, how many are engaging, how many are converting, so if the malls are prepared to pre-equip the spaces with that kind of equipment, it doesn't. If you're going to move after 3 to 6 months, it doesn't make sense for the brand to own all that kit. It makes more sense to have that kit be in the ownership of the mall or whatever, and the brand just uses it for a bit and then moves on. Just as an aside from that,
continuing that thought,
yeah.
then, what are your thoughts on the mall providing the employees if they
I think they absolutely will. I think they absolutely will, because I think that being a high impact, highly enthusiastic brand ambassador, which is what these people are going to be, is going to be more of a specialist and higher paid occupation. And I think they're going to have a cadre of those available, which they will move between brands, which makes more sense when you think about it, because we all go around malls and we see all the staff standing around doing nothing in most of the malls, and then some shops are overwhelmed. It makes more sense to be able to move the resources to where the demand is. So I think that basically the brands will rent those people. Those people will be hired for their intelligence and receptivity, and all the brand will do is send their product trainer and do a day of product training, or maybe do it online to teach them the features and benefits of the product. So I think it's more important to have the right type of intelligent people than necessarily to have deep product expertise. But I think it's surprising what can be done with intelligent people in a short time period. I mean, I know all people like Neighborhood Goods and Showfields offers people the option of having their own staff if they want it, but they say that 99% of the brands that they engage with are very happy just to take their staff. Once they meet them, they're very happy to take them because they're high caliber people.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark. Jason, I saw you raise your hand first. We've got lots of questions, Mark.
Okay. All right. Hey, Mark, you addressed most of this I had a question regarding the labor force. This idea of specialists that can get carted around, and they have basically a higher service capacity in general, but they're not specialists in a product. What would we be doing to vest those folks in their job? Because there's a lot of peculiarities of being a generalist that tend to have high turnover. Pay isn't an incentive when you have to have people away from their families, away from their homes. So what are we doing to vest the people we're relying on to sell in these jobs, because they're an essential part of products moving out the door?
Yeah, I mean, I think that at the end of the day, you can have all the normal incentives, obviously sales, etc. I think you can also reward people for engagement, because one of the things that Showfields found, which was very interesting, was that they found that when new brands came into the New York area and would do 3 months with Showfields or 6 months, even when consumers didn't buy in the store, they had tracking mechanisms for engagement. So whether people left their data or showed interest in the product, and they found a very high correlation. A very large number of the online orders for those brands were people who'd had their first contact with the brand through Showfields. So I think it makes sense to reward them for what you might call leads or engagement as well as sales. Because they are making a big contribution to that process. I think more research is needed in that area, but I definitely think the indications are that a really good first engagement in store can definitely boost online sales. So to give an assist, a bonus for an assist, is important. I think that the other thing is that, what I'm talking about as a retail job is a very different job from what used to be the case, because having worked in stores myself, it's backbreaking hard work, moving all the stock around and doing all the administrative work. Your engagements with customers really can be as little as maybe 20 or 30% of what you do. So, the fact that a lot of that burden is going to be taken away and people are really just going to be engaging with customers, that's the pleasant, enjoyable side of things. And if you're going to pay people more, and also retail is really, it can be very boring. You're selling the same product over and over again. I think it can be much more interesting to periodically change to another brand and be educated in another brand. So I see it as a different type of job. It's closer to being like a hairstylist. I think people will develop much better relationships with individual consumers. I mean, if you think that maybe the mall or the main street kind of owns the consumer, and the staff rotate between brands, but are essentially engaging with the same consumers, maybe on different brands at different times, but they may be dealing with the same consumers. So I think that they become much more of a generalist, trying to help and interact with individual consumers and get them what they need.
Thanks, Mark. Jason, does that help? I see you had kind of a follow-up here.
Are you speaking to me, Michelle?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mark. That was a lovely answer. It sounds to me something more. I come from pre-hospital, EMT paramedic, and it sounds like that's what you're describing. A lot of my coworkers, staff were paramedics, and today they were with one service. 6 months later, they were with another service. But the quality of service and their engagement with providing a quality service was more attached to their professional identity than the service that they were part of. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that as an analogy, but that's great. I think it becomes more of a profession. I think actually, if you look back 50 years, it used to be a profession. People used to raise families on the retail job, but it stopped being that. It became, I think, the long, slow, painful profit squeeze on incumbent retailers reduced that job to a Mac job, basically, and it stopped being fun, and people moved on a lot for an extra few dollars, and I think what we're talking about is taking it back to something that is fun and enjoyable, and maybe we can have a professional qualification, because really what you're talking about is personalized marketing. It's the equivalent of what we do with websites, where we personally market to people. I think this level of, this caliber of people will have their own clients. And maybe they'll move from brand to brand, but the clients will be going into the same shopping centers because they live there, and they'll be looking out for people individually and servicing them and trying to help improve their lives. It becomes more than just a transaction. It becomes, you're delivering a really valuable service to people.
Thanks, Mark. That's a really interesting concept. Ian has his hand up next, and then we'll do Moham and Nick after. Yep.
Oh gosh, yeah, thank you. Colin, fascinating, really thought-provoking and enjoyable presentation. Thanks for sharing on that. Just a couple of I'm just really going to echo a little bit. I think Jason pulled some of the thoughts in there. I think when I'm sort of observing this, I think what's really interesting is more the human aspect to this and the people aspect, and the fact that we're effectively looking to elevate what's become, like you said, a fairly factotum kind of role. And I can definitely see that person that's not necessarily knowledgeable in the product, but has the right attitude and the skills and the engagement, can be transferred and reskinned into a different area. What's really interesting, I'm wondering if there's a connection here with some of the things that we're doing, which is around augmented AI. So we're seeing a big push for AI that improves the experience. So that knowledge process that you talked about in terms of them getting skilled up, that's a fairly steep learning curve. And we're certainly, Jason and Ben are doing some amazing stuff with what I describe as reasoning bots. So how do we take robotic conversations beyond the password reset and actually trawling into some of the IP around really sophisticated thought processes from professional positions? So just keen to sort of explore whether you're seeing any traction around augmented AI and enriching human experiences with humans based on technology.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I'm not sure whether it's AI or not, but I mean, one of the benefits of proper customer tracking with the customer's permission through apps and things, is that, you know, it equips the shop staff with all their customers' previous purchases and likes and dislikes. And that is a huge win, both for the store staff and for the consumer, because, you know, they can automatically start lining things up for people that they're going to like. So that's a huge support. It's not maybe necessarily AI, but obviously AI can only make that better. So if AI is going to do part of the reasoning process, and can remember and extrapolate a lot more to help guide the shop staff, so that it becomes a human plus an aid, which improves that human's performance. Then, you know, like a talented actor learning new lines, if someone's supplying the prompts and the lines, they can deliver the lines. You've still got that human face, but a lot of the grunt work can be done by the technology. Yeah, I could see that being really a really fertile area.
Yeah, that's very attractive, especially given the, you know, the statistics on the economic hollowing from AI and the projections about how many jobs are being hollowed out, and rightly so, right? I mean, in some ways, and then the Industrial Revolution did that. But if we are still relying on things that AI don't have, like charisma and personality and engagement, and then it's a long way. So it feels like a good blend potentially there that would be resonant to a lot of investors. But yeah,
I think it's a great blend, and I don't think we're going to see the hollowing out. I think we're going to see more value add with humans supported by AI. People as they have during this, as I said during this presentation, you know, what consumers expect now is far higher, just because of what's already happened. And I think AI is going to do more of that. It's going to provide. We'll be able to provide things we've never been able to provide to people before. And it will become more and more personalized. It will really be personal shopper time. And it's going to make it much more enjoyable for everybody.
I
agree.
Hope so. All right, Moham, Nick, and then I see Ben. So Moham, please.
Hey, Mark, thanks for a great talk. Just wondering whether you've looked at impact on vendors to retailers. You know, we are technology vendors to some retailers and consulting vendors. You know, who's doing interesting work there? Who's helping them through the transition? Where are the opportunities for vendors like ourselves in technology and AI and data management to help retailers make this transition?
Oh, that's a very good question. Well, I think that one of the biggest areas, which probably sounds obvious, but when I actually talk to retailers and brands, it's surprising how many of them haven't done it yet, is to do with data collection and integration. You know, it's actually quite hard to find systems that I mean, Shopify's launched one that link something as basic as till data and online data to create a single unified view of an individual consumer. I was talking to one brand and they said, you know, they'd just done that, and they found that it was Rafa, the cycling company, and there was this guy in San Francisco who used to come into their coffee shop every day and sit, and never bought anything and just drank coffee. And they always thought he was a bit strange. When they integrated the data, they realized he was the biggest customer in the whole Bay Area, online, never in store, but he was going to the store to engage with his community. And I think that visibility, total visibility, they were like, well, if we'd have known that, we might have given him a cake, a free cake or something like that. But, you know, having that probably maybe sounds very basic to many of the people here, but it's surprising how many people haven't got that. And then, so in terms of collecting and integrating data, trying to make stores more like websites and the things I've talked about, you know, looking at passing traffic, conversion levels, you know, engagement levels, etc., to try and make the store more like a website, so you can see everything that's happening and analyze how productive it's really being. All this stuff about, you know, assists, you know, whether, you know, one of these great brand ambassadors makes a customer fall in love with the brand, and then the person goes and buys online. How do you put a marker on that person's account to say, well, actually, you know, it was you know, Genevieve in this store that actually switched this person on to the brand? Those kind of areas. And then we've talked about some of the other ones, you know, when a customer comes in, to be able to recognize them and very quickly support the staff with useful information. You've got the whole interactive screen bit, which is really important. I mean, Nike's doing interesting work where, you know, you go in, you know, you link your app to the flagship store, and you know, you can point the app at a display, an entire display. It has a barcode, and the app already knows your size dimensions, and then you can browse the store, and then the app will send you a message that all the things on that display in your size will be available in the fitting room. So that's a great customer service gain. When you're in the fitting room, you know, to be able to say, actually, you know, I need the large, not the medium. It sounds like a basic thing, but it's important to be able to visualize, say, I won't talk about clothing a little bit, but visualize clothing on your body without having to go through that uncomfortable undressing and dressing and undressing and dressing process, you know, to be able to visualize, like, you know, I've got the green, but I'd like to see it in blue, you know, on an interactive screen, even just self-checkout on an interactive screen in the fitting room, so you don't have to bother going and queuing up, all those kind of things. Screens for everything, screens that will, you know, turn the visuals in the store into your personal store. So you know, I don't know, you you like Levi's 501s, you go into the Levi's store and, you know, there's you in the Levi's 501 advert, I don't know, on the screens, that kind of thing. You know, it's interesting to see how far you could take it. But and then screens to support brand theatre, tell the brand story, so that you go in, it becomes more like a virtual reality experience going into a store where you are suddenly in the world. You know, you go into Louis Vuitton and suddenly you're there in the 19th century in the craft shop where Monsieur Vuitton is creating his. That's all going to create the entertainment factor that's going to draw people into retail. So there's so many areas where I think technology can help with this process. Does that kind of answer it? You may have been thinking about different things. I don't know.
No. The first part was definitely relevant to what we do. I was thinking more also, how do you bring the online technology and the store technology, the interconnected experiences? Is there anyone doing anything interesting there?
I think in general it's quite hard. I mean, I actually looked at setting up a multi-channel business from scratch, you know, to build the till system and the Shopify website at the same time and have them talk to each other. Trying to find someone to do that, it was quite hard, surprisingly hard. You know, because you know, obviously people are used to having till systems and then saying, okay, I'm going to have a website, and then having them not talk to each other. But if you actually want from the very beginning, I would advise anybody starting a business now to go multi-channel and to start with both. And to have a system that encompasses both. And it's not just the customer data. I've talked about the customer data. It's also the stock. See, people like Walmart and Best Buy and Target are doing great work now using the store stock as part of their online business. You know, they're fulfilling, because they've got so many stores, you know, they're cutting the cost of the final mile by using their stores to ship. But to do that, you've got to have really good stock systems and stock visibility and logistics system. So it's that single view of the stock across both internet and store warehouse, and single view of the consumer across both businesses. I think that is a major area, a very fertile area.
Thank you.
Great. We are at the 1 minute mark, and we didn't get to Dick, but we know where to find you, Mark. So appreciate everyone joining today. And yeah, Mark, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Well, it's been great. Lovely talking to you guys, and thanks for giving me the opportunity.
Great. Thanks, everyone.